Hello. Okay, so as many of you know, I've been telling you a lot of the stories behind my poems from my collection Between Hindsight and Foresight. And I have now shared a story from all of the poems in that collection. I do have other writings coming. I am still working on projects, but in the meantime, I wanted to share some of the things that I love the best of other more classical poems. I'm an English teacher. I can't help myself. And so while we wait for me to finish up my other projects and to start telling you new stories, I'm going to be continuing with the other content that I was sharing with you before. Things about generating ideas, things about structuring, things about where we get our writing from, how to work with particular things. But one of the ways that I've decided I'm going to do this is by giving you classic examples from writers that I admire or writers that have known or been known to be excellent, fantastic writers. Now, obviously, I do not own the rights to any of these poems, but they are mostly out of date or they are out of copyright. It's important to also know that while I do have degrees in literature, I have an English degree from Penn State University, among other literature degrees, I am not what I would consider an expert in any one of the writers or poems that I'm going to talk to you about. All I'm going to be giving you is my own interpretation. But the best part, and what I always tell all of my students about any kind of poem or any kind of writing, is that every person who looks at it looks at it differently. And no matter how much or how little you know of a writer, the interpretation of what you see and how you look at a poem is valid. It may not be an academic looking, it may be that you find meaning in it that others do not, and all of that is perfectly valuable. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you how I break down a poem and how I look at something that I admire and what I get out of certain poems that I am going to be sharing with you. So this is the first go at this. So let's get started and see how we go. So obviously, Tennyson's Ulysses is extremely famous. It has been around for a couple of hundred years. Tennyson was the poet laureate for Queen Victoria, or one of the poet laureates for Queen Victoria. And so a lot of his work has lasted and been studied over and over again in various different forms for many, many years. One of the key things about the opening of Tennyson's Ulysses is that it begins with stagnation. It begins with standing still. So when we look at this opening lines, because it is a monologue from the point of view of Ulysses of Greek legend, is that it's one long speech. The verses or the sections are not separated. It's one long kind of monologue of one person's point of view on life itself and how it should be lived or how it should not be lived. And so the fact that it begins with the stagnation or the feeling of stagnation is interesting. So the poem is obviously set after Ulysses or Odysseus, depending on which version you read, when he has already come back from Troy, when he has returned to the island of Ithaca, reclaimed his throne, reclaimed his wife, found his son. All of his adventuring days are in his past, but I don't want to say behind him, because part of the reason why it starts in stagnation is because it's how he's feeling after all of that. So, for example, we look at, it profits little that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. So the stagnation, the focus on idle king, still hearth, barren crags, aged wife, all of these are indications of being stuck or holding still, not moving. And that seems to irritate or frustrate Odysseus and Ulysses. This concept of how all he does all day in this one place is deal out some unequal laws, and he almost denigrates his subjects. He's a king, and it's his job to look after these people, but he identifies them as a savage race, a denigration that implies they're less than or they're uncivilized. And, you know, and he talks about how they hoard and they sleep and they feed, but they know not me. They're simple people. They don't understand me because they are different than me. They are doing what they do and they're going through their daily life, but they don't understand me. They don't know me as a person. All I do is give them their laws, their instructions. And so that stagnation in the opening of the poem, the opening 5 lines, really frustrates him. In the next section, we talk about, or Odysseus talks about his unending experience, how much life and how much experience he had before he became an idle king, before he came to rest at home in Ithaca. Ulysses is famous for having wandered the seas. He spent 10 years in Troy fighting to get Agamemnon's wife back for him, to conquer that, to defeat the gods. And then, having defeated Troy, or helped Agamemnon defeat Troy, he then was so arrogant that he ticked off the god of the sea. And in ticking him off, the god of the sea prevented him from reaching home for 10 years. He lost so many of his sailors. He lost so much time. It's 20 years since he'd been home. So he's talking about his unending experience as being the reason why feeling idle and feeling stagnated is so difficult. So as we can see, I cannot rest. This imperative impulse, I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All the times I have enjoyed greatly, suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone on shore, and when through scuttling drifts, the rainy Hyades vex the dim sea. Wherever he has been, he has been unable to rest. He has both enjoyed greatly and suffered greatly. He has lived a life of extremes in his experience. This concept of everywhere he has been and everyone he has ever known has been part of those extremes. It is a constant changing, constant scale of his experience. So when he's talking about, I am become a name for always roaming with a hungry heart, he is identifying himself, his name, his person, his very being, as being synonymous with wandering, with constant seeking forward. Much have I seen and known, cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all. He's putting himself at the top of his experience. Everyone and everything he has ever run into, ever been part of, has been not beneath him in a subjugated sense, but kind of like, I am not least amongst all of those people and places and governments and encounters that I have had. He has seen all of these things, and he sees himself as not least, but honored of them all. Everybody loves him. Everybody honors him. Everybody sees him as the pinnacle and the height. And so when he talks about, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy, he's identifying with that experience, that the idea of having drunk the delight of battle, having had that experience, he can't go back. He can't not be who he is. And who he is always roaming with a hungry heart, always looking for the next adventure, always encountering new manners, climates, governments, councils. You know, he is always moving forward and encountering more and more and more. Whether he is enjoying it greatly or suffering it greatly, it has all been part of his unending experience. As we move on, the next 4 lines talk about the universal consciousness, the fact and part, and how that universal consciousness is part of his identity. It's not just that he is a singular being. It's not just that he is, as stated in the previous lines, that his name and identity has become synonymous with wandering. He is part of all that he has met. Every person he encounters becomes part of himself, and he becomes part of them. Yet all experience is an arch, where through gleams that untraveled world, whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. The imagery of experience as an arch, the concept that every experience that we have moves us forward and leads to the next experience, to the next experience, the next experience. It's a tunnel, it's a passageway. This concept of life as a path is something that has been universal through many, many cultures. And this idea of how the horizon always fades forward is something that is in every kind of sailing adventure that's ever seen. The curvature of the earth means that no matter how far you travel forward, there is always a horizon before you. And the idea that the margin is constantly fading is not just about lands or seas or traveling. It is this concept of never standing still, of each and every single moment, each and every single experience leading to the next and the next into eternity. And so that concept of unending time, of moving forever forward, is synonymous with Ulysses, is synonymous with life experience. And so we move from stagnation at the beginning of the poem to this concept of how he can't fight who he is. He can't fight that he is part of all that he has met. He can't fight that each new experience draws him forward through the next arch. So he is now moving away from stagnation into the frustration and how his determination to make the most of life. He is now not going to be that idle king. He is not choosing to be that idle king. Now he is choosing to go through that arch and make the most of life, because how dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished. The connotation of all of these words, pause and rust, it just lacking use, not to shine in use. This concept of being useless if you are pausing, if you are ending, if you are rusting. All of that concept that giving into that stagnation and not going through that arch to the next experience forever into that margin that fades means that he is less than, as though to breathe were life. He's talking about the difference between living and surviving. Just breathing is not enough for him. He needs more to life. He needs to make the most out of life. Breathing as an idle king, just being alive is not enough for him. Surviving is not enough for him. He needs to live and travel in that experience. And he emphasizes that with that next bit, life piled on life were all too little. So even if you had more than one life, even if you were immortal, eternal, it would still not be enough for him. And of one to me, little remains. So he knows that his one life that he has, he doesn't have life piled on life, but the one that he does have, he knows and recognizes that little remains of it, that he is running out of time, that he is old and he has lived his life in extremes, and that every second passes that he has less, and that there is more behind than there is ahead. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things. So every hour that he's not dead, the eternal silence being a metaphor for death, every hour that is saved from death, something more, a bringer of new things. Every hour he lives, every hour he goes forward and has those experiences, is something, a victory, and it's vile. He considers it evil almost for, if it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. 3 days, 3 suns. He's considering even holding still for 3 days is negative, is vile, is repellent to him. And he uses the same word for himself. And vile it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. He uses the same word he used to denigrate his subjects in the beginning, to place his subjects beneath him. He uses the same word, hoard myself, as in saving myself, just breathing, not actually living. He uses that same word he uses for his own subjects that don't understand him, that don't know him, that are unequal and savage. He is now saying, if I stay still, even for 3 days, to save myself, it will It will destroy me. It will be less than. And so he moves on, and this gray spirit, so old, this gray spirit, yearning in desire to follow in knowledge like a sinking star, beyond the utmost bound of human thought. He has an absolute burning impulse that he has to go forward, if going through each arch into the next experience forever and forever. If that is knowledge, if each new experience piles and piles and piles, and all that he has known is added to as he chases that fading horizon, he will go beyond humanity. He will go beyond this life or the next life or life piled on life. And so he feels a need to make the most of life and to go on past what would normally be expected of someone like him. What would normally be expected of someone to stay still. He can't do it. He can't. He sees it as evil and vile to even hold still for so much as 3 suns, to store and hoard myself. He can't do it. He has that gray spirit yearning in desire. It absolutely, his soul itself, his spirit is, old though it may be, little life that may be left to him, he has to follow it like a shooting star. He has to go beyond what normal people would think of. So we have each to their own. Now is where he kind of almost backtracks. He's been speaking about himself this whole time. He's been speaking about the stagnation he feels, having returned and giving out these laws to the people that don't understand him. He's talked about his past, and now he's recognizing, as we move towards the end of the poem, he's recognizing that he is different and that his son is not him. He is marking out himself as different than his own son. He is not denigrating his son in this. When we look at, this is my son, mine own Telemachus, he's owning that this is his son. He is owning that in almost in a possessive way, that what he is contributing is his son. He's giving over his son to the task that he is not capable of. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle. He's leaving his kingdom to his son, and he's doing it like an act of choice, like his son doesn't have any part of it, that his son is a possession, that he's leaving in his place to do something that he can't do. Because, as he adds, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. He is complimenting his son for being able to do what he cannot. He cannot be an idle king and sit down and dole unequal laws to a savage race who hoard and sleep and feed and know not him. He can't do it. But what he has done is created a son that belongs to him, is of him, with whom he can leave that task that he can't do, that he can leave that task, who is discerning to do this job, to do this labor, that, you know, his prudence, his mildness can take that rugged people and softly and slowly subdue them to be useful and good. He doesn't suggest that he himself is bad or inadequate because he can't. He doesn't suggest that Telemachus is less than or worse than himself because he can. What he is saying is, most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. He's not saying that he has failed as a king because he can't do this job. It's not part of his identity. It's not part of who and what he is. He is synonymous with roaming with a hungry heart. Telemachus is well suited to this job, that his center of sphere is part of this common duty, that he's decent not to fail in the offices of tenderness that he can't do, that he can do everything that is needed to do on the island in this kingdom to help these people become useful and good, but that, that those each to their own, that Telemachus works his work and will be good at it, and is not as blameless that he is good at it. It's not his fault that he's good at it. It's not his fault that he's not like me. It's not my fault that I'm not like him. He works his work, I work mine. And so there is a real kind of ownership of his own son and passing it on to his own son because he'll be better at it. So, it's a real interesting idea where inheritance is what we leave behind. Legacy is what we leave behind. And he's not upset that his son doesn't follow in his footsteps. And I would guess he hopes that his son isn't mad that he just has to go, that he is who he is. Because when he actively gives it over to his son, he's giving his son his authority without requiring of him that he copy his dad. Most fathers want their sons to follow in their footsteps, or at least improve upon their footsteps, do better than they did. And in a way, he's saying that Telemachus is that. Telemachus is better for the job that he is giving up than he is, because of who he is and all that he has known and seen. He can't do it. So he works his work, I work mine, each to their own. So now he moves back to a different family, having given over the inheritance to his own family, having recognized that he gets little profits. He cannot be an idle king. So he goes back to the brotherhood of sailors that he knows extremely well. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. The ship itself is personified. The ship itself is calling for him and being alive and waiting. So there lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark broad seas, my mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. So while his people are a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not him, his mariners, and they are his mariners, just like he says, my son, my mariners. These are ones who have worked with him, have created with him, have thought with him. They understand him. His people never will. His son might not, but they do. And so he's saying that they are steadfast, they frolic welcome, they are happy to take both thunder and sunshine with him, both the good and the bad. The enjoyed greatly, suffered greatly from earlier on in the poem. These sailors, these people, have been with him in that. So there is that kind of voluntary joining that the free hearts and free foreheads, free hearts and free minds, they are willingly joining him in the thunder and the sunshine. They are going with him. He recognizes now, as he speaks directly to them, you and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. We still have things to contribute. Just because we are old doesn't mean we can't find glory, we can't find honor, we can't find work, we can't find things to do, because you go through that arch forever and forever, the horizon goes forward. And so, even though death closes all, even though little of his one life remains, something before the end, some work of noble note may yet be done. We might still accomplish something. We might still accomplish something that is worthy of people who used to fight with gods, who strove with gods. Because for 10 years in Troy, that's what he and his sailors did. For 10 years on the ocean, that's what he and his sailors did. Gods and nymphs and sorceresses and cyclops and whirlpools, maelstroms, monsters and magic and gods, they fought them all together. And so, although he has left behind his son and his people, these people wait for him to be part of it. I am part of all that I have known. I am part of all that I have met. These are his soulmates, his mariners that have been through all that with him before and will again, that they are most likely the happiest to keep going, to keep trying, and to keep looking for that work of noble note that could still be done, that is worthy of those who have done all that they have done before. So he's now risking everything. He's made his decision. I leave the scepter to my son, and now I'm going to give in to this impulse to follow knowledge like a sinking star. He's going to risk everything just for a chance at completing those things worthy of those that fought with gods. So the lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends. It is not too late to seek a newer world. He's coming through to that last arch. He knows that his life is ending. He knows that death will finish everything. The entire thing is a metaphor for not going quietly into that good night, but also not a battle, but a welcome friend, twinkling from the rocks like it's winking at you. The sea, the lights of the sea, the moon, the stars, the sunset, they're all kind of twinkling. The long day could be his life. The long day wanes. He knows that little is left of this one life, so his life is waning. He is towards the end, and the slow moon climbs. The nighttime is coming. Night and eternal dark and all of those things, they represent death. The deep moans round with many voices. So the sea, the ocean, the deep moans round with many voices. Obviously, many of his sailors died on his journeys. Many of his soldiers, many of his companions passed into the underworld, into the deep. Those voices call to him, and he is asking his mariners, my mariners, directly speaking to them, my friends, it is not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. I am determined. I am going to risk everything. I am going to push everything. I am continue to hold that purpose, to keep going, to keep obtaining experiences, to keep wandering with a hungry heart, to go beyond the sunset, beyond that horizon until my last breath. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. He's talking about it, going out to sea again. It may kill us. It may be that we reach heaven, because obviously the happy isles, the reference to sailing until you reach the never-ending lands, the summer lands in some mythologies, the place where Achilles waits. Obviously Achilles died in the Battle of Troy, so they're saying it doesn't matter. It may be we'll die out there. It may be that the gulfs will take us down, but when we do, we will meet those that we have known before. And so this concept of risking all just for a chance to find that newer world, to find those experiences, to still do that work of noble note. He can't stop himself. It's not in his nature. And so we get to the last 6 lines, the most amazing, most famous lines in poetry, in my opinion, and in many people will know part of it without knowing that this is where it comes from. They'll know these words, this concept of fighting until you don't have any fight left. They know that. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and earth, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And so this ending of the poem, the closing, the mic drop moment, this concept that even though we have lost a lot, much has taken, we still have a lot, much abides. And so, and even recognizing that they aren't the same people, that they aren't as strong as they were when they started, that they aren't of that same strength which fought heaven, which moved heaven and earth. they can only be who they are, that their identity and the thing that makes them who they are still remains, that they are of the same mind, the same temperament, the same hearts. Yes, time has worn them away. Time has made them weak. Fate has made them weak, because that is the destiny of all men, to become older, become slower, become weaker, but they still are who they are at the core, that nothing will weaken their will. And that the most important thing, the resilience that they fight every fight with, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. This is where we go from perpetual motion from stagnation. At the start of the poem, he was feeling stagnated because he was trying to be something he wasn't. By the end of the poem, he has accepted and put forward a path that will mean that no matter what, he will continue to be who he is, what he is, until the very last breath, until the gulf pulls him down, until he sees his old friends again. There is no part of his being weak or old or little left to his life. Nothing, fate, death, time, nothing will stop him from striving and seeking and finding, and nothing will make him yield, give up. It's not in his nature. It's not in his being. And I think that that kind of resilience, that kind of statement within this poem that Tennyson created from the old legends is so unbelievably powerful. He works his work, I work mine. No matter what your work is, no matter who you are, how many you have known, your unending experience or lack thereof, this is the message, that no matter who we are or what we are, going through that archway to the new experience, chasing that horizon that fades ever before us, the one thing that is most important is to never, ever, ever give up in what we are seeking. Because otherwise, we are an idle king. We are stagnant. We are suffering amongst things and people that know not us. So, I hope you've enjoyed my discussion of this poem by Tennyson, Ulysses, based on the legends of Ulysses and Odysseus and the Odyssey from Homer. The Victorian poets did a lot of this. They would go into classical mythology and they would create something new. And so I hope you've enjoyed this first, kind of rendition of going through a classical poem and talking about it, explaining it, pulling out some interpretations. If you don't see what I see, if you see something else, that is just as valid. But I'm hoping that you've enjoyed my interpretation of Tennyson's Ulysses. I also hope to see you next time with new content. And until then, take care, strive, seek, find, and never yield. Bye.